So we are now, we are recording this session, and we're just almost at the top of the hour. I'm just getting ready. I see lots of folks are attending. Just for our attendees' information, I think we had about 40 people register for the call today, so it's great to see a wonderful turnout. And we'll be formally starting here in just a moment. Let's see. Our host is in Pacific time. Myself, I'm in Central time, and our presenter is in Eastern time. So kind of got the whole nation covered there. And shout out to those folks in Mountain time. Don't mean to shut you out, but you're all awesome. And I'll go ahead and just turn this over to Paula in just a moment. So you can start. Go ahead and start.
Okay. Shall we wait officially until 11 o'clock?
Yes.
Well, that's Pacific time. You can keep Mountain time. I'll keep sunny California. So let's see.
Our wonderful colleagues in Mountain time that live in Phoenix, you know, they don't observe the daylight savings time. So they're in
This is true.
But we love them.
Those rebels.
I know.
Right?
Shout out to those folks.
Shout out to everyone who's joining us today for this great topic that's so critical for all of us.
All right, Paula, I'd say you are good to go. Hello, everybody. This is Gretchen from Alive, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm going to turn it over to Paula Allen, our host for today.
Welcome, everyone, to the first Alive Academy webinar for 2020. I am so pleased you could join us today for this webinar on volunteer risk management. A brief overview for our agenda today. We'll deal with some housekeeping notifications real quick, then introductions. Of course, we're all here for the presentation, and we'll have time for questions and discussion afterwards. Stay tuned at the end of the webinar to learn more about what the Alive Academy can teach you in 2020. When it comes to housekeeping and tech support, you've got options to log in from your computer or call in from your phone with audio only. If you're having trouble with your computer, sometimes splitting it to your video feed in your computer and you're calling in by phone on audio will help. Put any tech support questions you might have in the chat box to presenters only, and Gretchen will try and help sort you out as quickly as possible. Speaking of that chat box, if you want to talk to all attendees, make sure you choose that function. Otherwise, you're talking to me and Gretchen, and we want to encourage you to chat with each other and share your experience. Gretchen and I will be monitoring questions as we go along, but I know that William has a lot of audience participation built in. And I could not be more pleased to present William Henry for this critical topic on managing volunteer risks. William Henry represents the Volunteers Insurance Service Association, Incorporated, based in Woodbridge, Virginia. VIS provides insurance and risk management services to volunteer-based nonprofit organizations and public entities that engage volunteers in every state and the District of Columbia. William is a frequent speaker at nonprofit events on managing the risks involved in volunteer engagement. He's also frequently interviewed on practices and prevention of elder exploitation, and he is the co-author of The Crown of Life Society, the first novel to ever address elder exploitation and family caregiving as primary subjects. So, after our presentation, we'll do the questions and discussion, and then announcements. At the moment, I'd like to turn it over to William, and we'll get started with the presentation.
All right. Well, it's great to be here in the Academy and to have the opportunity to talk with you about volunteer risk management. All right. I'm going to trust that my screen is visible now and you're seeing the title of this presentation, Managing Volunteer Risks, What Could Possibly Go Wrong? Am I right about that?
You're right about that.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for the introduction. And yes, you covered it pretty well, what we do, Volunteers Insurance Service Association. We think of ourselves as the resource for any volunteer-based organization. So it's good to be with you today. Over the nearly 50 years that our volunteer insurance program has existed, we've seen certain kinds of claims repeatedly, as well as a few less common ones. So today we're going to look at how those claims occur and what we can do to prevent them. At the end of the webinar, if I do okay, you'll know how to identify risks that are specific to your own organization, how to minimize them, and when something bad happens despite your best efforts, how to deal with it. And just as important, you'll know how to keep the risk management effort going strong, even as your staff and your volunteers come and go. So let's start by my asking you a few questions about what you already do to manage volunteer risks. Please answer yes or no to each of the questions that you will see on your screen.
Okay, everybody, I'm going to be asking quick poll questions. And in the past, you may have done this before. It's pretty simple. Just answer yes or no on the question. I'll show the results. We'll go on to the next question. So the first one is, have you analyzed tasks volunteers perform from the standpoint of safety for volunteers and for others around them? I'm going to give you just a few seconds to vote. And they're pouring in. Very good. Thank you. And these are anonymous, so if you answer one or the other, we don't know. And that's not the point to call anybody out, that's just for information. So we'll end this first poll, share those results. And as you can see, we had 80% yes, 20% no. So now we'll
Very good.
go with the next question. And that is, do you interview volunteers to learn what skills they do or do not have and assign work accordingly? Very good. And I will go ahead and end the poll and share those results. 87% yes and 13% no. And our next question is, do you inspect the locations where volunteers are assigned for potential hazards such as falls, fire, or lighting? Great job, everybody. And our results, 60% yes and 40% no. And our next poll question. Do you train volunteers to ensure they can perform their tasks skillfully and safely? Great poll answers coming through here. Thank you. And of course, if you're calling in just on your phone, you wouldn't be able to vote, but that's why I'm reading things out loud. So you can vote in your head. Share the results of that. 86% yes, 14% no. And our next question, one more after this. Okay, are supervisors assigned to volunteers, and are they held accountable for making sure volunteers perform their assignments as they have been trained? You might be an all-volunteer organization, but there still has to be accountability if you are going to manage risks. Okay, go ahead and stop right there, and we have scored 100 on that poll.
Whoa, look at that.
Awesome. Okay, and here's our last poll question. Do you have a specific action plan in the event of a volunteer is injured, injures someone, or damages someone's property? And good job, everybody. I'll leave it open for just a few more seconds. And there we go. We've got 77% yes and 23% no. I will stop sharing the polls. And William, you can.
All right. Well, those were some solid percentages for sure. But if you did not have 100% yes answers yourself, or if you weren't sure about some, I can help you today. By the way, the questions I just used are from a more detailed questionnaire that is in your handouts. These are the 4 categories of claims that we see in our volunteer insurance program. Today, as we go through the rest of this session, I want you to think about what your volunteers do and write down all the scenarios you can think of where a volunteer could be injured, perhaps injure someone else, damage someone's property, or commit a dishonest act that hurts the organization. In a phrase, what could possibly go wrong? Now, I'm sure that most of you are positive people most of the time, but sometimes you have to think negatively in order to keep negative things from happening. So we'll do some negative thinking today. I'll get it going by giving you some examples of actual claims we have seen in our program, and we'll start with injuries to the volunteer. That is the most common kind of claim. Falling is the most common type of injury claim. So let's talk about falls and how to prevent them. To prevent falls, you have to look at the environment the volunteer will be assigned, whether it's a location that you see every day or another location where the volunteer is assigned. Going back to the poll, I think there were some who said that they were not able to scout those locations for potential hazards. If it's possible for the supervisor to scout the locations where volunteers will be assigned, that's the best. But if it is not possible, tell your volunteers that you want them to be your eyes and ears at the locations where they are and report any conditions that might cause an injury to them or anyone else. And designate a person to whom the volunteer can report, someone who will make sure that those hazards are eliminated, either doing it themselves or assigning it to another capable volunteer. All right, what kinds of hazards could cause a fall? Is there any clutter on the floor? Are boxes left where people walk? Loose rugs, extension cords, poor lighting on stairways, loose handrails? We've had insurance claims caused by all those kinds of falls. And as you think about the tasks your volunteers are assigned, do they ever have to reach anything up high? Even occasionally? Make sure that there are ladders or step stools easily available. A few months ago, a volunteer was making changes on a signboard that was a little out of her reach. It was up a little higher than she could reach unassisted. So it was in the reach of the volunteer who usually changed the signboard, but in this case, the volunteer couldn't reach it. So she climbed onto a chair and put her feet on the arms of the chair. And yeah, it fell and she was hurt. The chair, I think, was okay, but she was hurt. So these are the kinds of things that can happen. If the volunteer is working outside your facility where there's no ladder or stool that's provided, have them bring one from home. They can just leave it in their vehicle until it's needed. Do volunteers or anyone else have to carry things up or down stairs? One hand should be free to use the handrail. Don't carry anything heavy enough to require both hands. Take 2 trips instead. Here's an animating truth for your risk management program. You might be familiar with the territory, but the brand new volunteer is not. So make sure volunteers are mentally prepared for anything that's different from their normal environment. Maybe you know about the foster grandparent program, which is sponsored by the Corporation for National and Community Service. We insure all the foster grandparents, and we see a lot of injuries that could have been prevented if the volunteer supervisor had devoted a little time to training. The new foster grandparent volunteer who's accustomed to living in a nice, quiet environment at home might not be ready for a classroom where little kids can dart out in front of you or stick their feet out and trip you or tug on your sleeve. We see that all the times in claims when foster grandparents fall and get hurt. Now, you might not have volunteers who work around little kids, but I'll bet you have them working where they could trip over something they didn't see. So are you imagining some ways that a volunteer might fall in your real world? And these falls can be expensive. Medical care can run into several $1,000s quickly. Winter adds to the risk of injuries due to falls. So are your volunteers prepared to clear the walk and the steps at their clients' homes or other locations where they work? All right. Another common type of injury is lifting, occurs when volunteers lift things. When they have to lift and carry things, what is the big risk there? If you said back injury, you are right. So make sure volunteers know how to lift properly with the legs, not the back. So maybe the loads they're carrying should be smaller too, and maybe hand trucks, dollies, or other materials handling equipment are needed. I have a resource for you. We have developed some one-page and two-page documents on a variety of safety subjects, including safe lifting. The index to what we call our preventer papers is in the handouts for this session. Members of VIS can access and download any of the preventer papers anytime from what we call the VIS Vault. Let's look at some other common kinds of injury claims. If your volunteers use tools in their work, have them show you that they know how to use those tools and not just tell you they do. One volunteer was trying to pull a nail from a board for the very first time. Instead of prying it out with the claw hammer, she tried to pull it straight out of the board, straight toward her face. Well, I don't have to tell you what happened there. She hit herself right in the mouth, and there was a lot of dental work that ensued. That was the supervisor's fault. It was wrong for the supervisor to assume that she knew how to pull a nail. So think about all the things your volunteers have to do and designate one or more volunteers who are trained in those tasks to oversee the process. They will be supervisors for safety training purposes. Make it their responsibility to have volunteers demonstrate safe use of tools and provide any necessary training. Having veteran volunteers train new ones is really good for both. It reinforces knowledge as well as imparting knowledge to the new volunteer. We see claims resulting from injuries while volunteers are working outdoors, maybe doing home repairs, landscaping, for example. Many times, those accidents can be prevented by just requiring volunteers to have the proper kinds of clothing, long sleeves, gloves, safety glasses, and the right kinds of shoes, for example. Especially those gloves. If they're going to be using cutting tools or handling sharp materials, have them wear leather gloves. They'll bring their own. Just tell them they need them. We see claims sometimes for allergic reactions, bee stings, poison ivy, pollen. Protective clothing can help, and maybe a mask for that pollen, but maybe a volunteer who has allergies should be assigned something to do indoors, or provide transportation services, at least at certain times of the year. By the way, it's okay to ask about allergies and any other medical condition or physical limitation that might affect a volunteer's ability to carry out a task safely. All right, do we have any questions at this point about falls, safe lifting, use of tools, outdoor work, any of those?
I'm not seeing any coming in from the audience, and that's okay. There'll be more chances for questions later. But I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit about Good Samaritan laws, and at any point would this be covered under that instance?
Yeah, Good Samaritan laws are volunteer immunity laws. There's a federal law passed, I believe it's 1998, and there are state laws that are modeled on that. The thing to keep in mind about those is that they usually exclude what is called gross negligence, and that term can be very elastic to a plaintiff's attorney who's filing a lawsuit. They probably will allege gross negligence. The other big loophole is that most of those laws, the ones I'm aware of, exclude anything involving a motor vehicle. So with those two big loopholes, Good Samaritan laws don't provide complete protection by any means. Take time to watch your volunteers in action and correct them if they're doing something that's unsafe. Just let them know you want everyone to work safely so no one gets hurt. You say it with an attitude of helpfulness, they'll appreciate the message, and you're doing a little bit each time to create that culture of safety awareness that you want. Safety training is like any other. You have to express yourself in the best way for the information to be accepted. People sometimes forget what you say, but they always remember how you made them feel when you said it. If you can make time, you can have safety sessions with volunteers as a group, educate everyone at once. But if that's not possible, one-on-one training is certainly good as well. And that's where those preventer papers will be able to help you. Are we doing some negative thinking yet? You thinking about the kinds of accidents that can happen to volunteers? We can, if you have questions later about injuries, we can come back to it. For now, let's move to the second type of risk, the L word, I call it, liability. I hear it all the time. What's our liability if we do this? It would serve the mission, but what about liability? Someone would like to volunteer, but if they're working directly with clients, they want to know what their liability is. Well, fear of the unknown is understandable, yes, but the good news is that liability usually can be managed. So you can put that L word in its place. What does the word mean? Liability is a situation in which the volunteer and/or the organization is held responsible for bodily injury or property damage. There are other kinds, but for this session, we'll stick to bodily injury and property damage. If there's a lawsuit, it will say that your volunteer was negligent or your organization was. Here's a working definition of negligence. You did something you should have known not to do, or you failed to do something that you should have known to do. If you did not properly screen, train, or supervise the volunteer who's involved, that is how liability might extend to the organization. And we'll talk a little about training and supervising later. Now, the charges might not be valid. People are sued all the time for things they didn't do. But it's important to create an environment where the chances of a liability claim are as low as you can make them. Sometimes claims in our insurance program arise out of situations involving vulnerable people, children, the elderly, those with chronic illness or disabilities. I'm sure some of you have those kinds of clients. It's good risk management to perform criminal background checks on any volunteer who would be working with vulnerable clients. I know you probably do that. Sterling Volunteers is one good provider. It's an official partner both of Alive and Viz. And background checks are good, but they're not enough. You might have a volunteer who's never been arrested or investigated for anything, but still might injure a client. There might be a verbal assault if the volunteer loses his or her temper, or it could be a physical assault. It doesn't happen often, but we have had claims in which volunteers lost their temper and struck people in their care. So you have to have rules on what volunteers can and cannot do, and then communicate and enforce those rules. I hear a lot about empowering volunteers to decide for themselves how to carry out their assignments. That doesn't work in risk management. If volunteers don't have instructions from you, they might react to situations the same as they would with their own family members. Their way might be okay and it might not. So don't leave them to their own devices and just scrub that word empowerment from your risk management vocabulary. So For example, we suggest you have written procedures for how volunteers should defuse a situation where a person in their care becomes agitated or even verbally abusive to a volunteer. It might not happen often, but it's best to have the volunteer mentally prepared for any situation where tension might be high and emotions could take over their actions. Just like you want them mentally prepared for hazards that could cause an injury to them, you also want them prepared for situations that could escalate into their hurting someone else or being accused of doing that. Here's another type of liability claim we had, and it's an object lesson in communication. An elderly man was injured when he fell out of his wheelchair that was being pushed by a volunteer. He was afraid the chair was going too fast, so he put his feet out to stop it and was thrown out. If we had seen it, all of us probably would have agreed that the chair actually was traveling at a safe speed. But the man in the chair didn't think so, and that's all that matters. So ask if the speed is okay. Take time to listen to the answer. Some of you probably already know this, that elderly people who are fragile can be very fearful of injury. So good communication can help avoid an incident that could result in a liability claim. Bodily injury also includes sexual abuse and molestation. That has to be a concern for any organization working with vulnerable populations. As I said before, sometimes accusations are false, but even if you are blameless, you still have to defend yourself. That can be very expensive, both financially and in terms of reputation and the distraction that the incident causes. Insurance comes into play, but do what you can to reduce the risk that an incident will occur or that a volunteer is in a position where he or she could be falsely accused. Require background checks, certainly. Have written procedures and take time to explain them. Having procedures designed to prevent bodily harm will help you in two ways. One, you can make sure that your volunteers are consistent in how they deal with those they're serving. And two, you'll discourage any people who have bad intent and want to volunteer for your organization. The more obstacles you put in front of those people, the more likely they'll just walk away and leave you alone. In the last part of the session, we'll get into just how you decide the procedures that are right for you. There is a method that works, and anyone can apply it. But on liability, what we've just gone over, are there questions now before we move to automobile liability?
Yes, I do have a couple of questions. One of them involves automobiles, so I'll let you decide if you want to wait. The first one is, how frequently do you train volunteers in safety? At first or every year? What do you recommend?
I think it should be more frequently than every year. That's why I suggested that small group training sessions, doesn't have to be weekly, but at a frequency that's reasonable for you, reinforces the fact that you have safety as a priority, and gets volunteers more attuned to the culture that you have established. So I think, maybe monthly is a good frequency for some organizations. Others that have perhaps some more hazardous activities might find it more desirable to do it more frequently. But I would not do it just yearly. That's almost like a token introduction of safety.
Thank you very much. The next question is regarding background checks. Some efforts are moving to background checking all volunteers, no matter what they are doing. Isn't that overkill, intrusive? Doesn't there need
Yeah, you don't have to treat everyone the same. If there's a volunteer who's not going to be in a position of being close to vulnerable clients or handling money, then you might decide that you don't need that criminal background check and you don't need that credit background check. It should be tailored to the responsibilities of the volunteer. But keep in mind, if a volunteer is promoted from what they originally were doing, maybe they were moving boxes in a warehouse and you weren't concerned about a criminal background check or a credit check, if they get promoted to a responsibility that involves handling money, for example, that would be the time to apply that credit check. And I know that Sterling Volunteers is very good at working with their customers to determine what kind of scalability is right for you with your background checks.
Thank you. And the last question on this segment kind of covers both. Volunteers use their own vehicles to deliver meals to our clients at their homes. One volunteer hit another volunteer's car in our parking lot. What part should we play in those instances?
In those cases, each of those volunteers has a personal auto insurance policy. And if it's just a low-speed collision like that, in all likelihood, the personal automobile policy of the volunteer who is at fault will pay for the damage. I mean, there are more serious auto liability claims that we see where the limits on the personal auto insurance policy are exceeded. If there are multiple injuries, or if the volunteer hits a brand new Mercedes and it totals it, those limits might be exceeded. Our program includes an excess auto liability policy that provides up to $500,000 in additional limits. So that's one solution that the organization might look at to protect their volunteers from having an out-of-pocket loss.
Thank you very much. That is, let me see here for one more question. What about having a volunteer sign a liability release form?
A waiver. I've never done a presentation where that question has not come up. So you can, as you might expect, I have a ready answer. Don't depend on liability waivers. They've been struck down many times in court. The judge will say, well, this is construed way too much in favor of the organization, or it's written too vaguely. Therefore, I'm going to let this volunteer's lawsuit proceed. The best purpose of having volunteers sign a waiver is that it tends to focus their attention on the fact that risks do exist, but do not depend on them to shield the organization.
Thank you very much.
Okay, ready for auto liability?
I believe so. Go for it.
All right. I imagine some of you have volunteers who drive their own vehicles to transport clients for medical appointments, shopping, or other places, or maybe taking supplies from one place to another, or someone mentioned meals delivery. From the kinds of claims we see in our program, accidents at intersections are the most common kind. Left turns when you don't have the right of way, turning from the wrong lane, running stop signs, those kinds of things. And poor visibility in inclement weather is another frequent cause. And sometimes accidents are very serious. A volunteer insured in our program turned left in front of an oncoming vehicle. She was killed, and the two occupants of the other vehicle were seriously injured. And there have been other very serious accidents in which volunteers were at fault. Now, getting motor vehicle records is a very good idea to make sure your volunteers haven't had serious violations. Just like with background checks of other kinds, getting motor vehicle records can help if your organization is sued for something that the volunteer did. It demonstrates that you did your due diligence, and that can protect you against a charge of negligence. And when you protect yourself against charges of negligence, you reduce your what? The L word. One of the handouts in this webinar is a motor vehicle acceptability checklist we created to help you evaluate a record in an objective way. And again, this is something Sterling Volunteers also can guide you with. If your state requires annual vehicle inspections, put each volunteer's vehicle inspection date on your calendar, and every year ask them for a copy of the certificate of safety inspection. Volunteer-related accidents don't always occur in traffic, by the way. we had a claim resulting from a fatality in a parking lot. The volunteer did not realize that the client was behind the car and backed over her. Now think about how that could have been prevented. You know, in risk management, it's usually the simplest solution that's the one you want to apply. And in this case, if there had been a rule that the volunteer could not leave the parking spot until the client was safely buckled in, the client might be alive today. In another claim in a parking lot, a client tried to get into the volunteer's car while the car was in gear. So the volunteer's foot slipped off the brake, the client fell and broke her leg. So if the volunteer had been trained to keep her doors locked unless the car was in park, the client would not have been able to open the door and try to get in. You know, if you have volunteers who drive, consider having a written test on your safety requirements that they must pass before they can transport anyone for you. Another resource that I can suggest to you is VIS has partnered with the National Volunteer Transportation Center to develop the first and only, as far as I know, online vehicle safety course that's designed specifically for volunteers. A volunteer driver can take this course at his or her convenience. It takes about an hour if they go straight through without pausing. There are modules of information, specific type of information. The volunteer answers a series of multiple choice questions before they can go on to the next module and so forth. And at the end of the course, the volunteer can generate a personalized certificate of completion. Some of our customers are making this a requirement for their drivers so that they can put it on their website and tell their clients and their supporters, all of our volunteer drivers are certified by the VIS National Volunteer Transportation Center course. So that's available at no charge to members of VIS. And it's a good way to get volunteer drivers refocused on the kinds of things that they probably learned when they took driver's ed in high school, but might have forgotten or at least neglected. So that's a resource I recommend to reduce the chances of having an auto liability claim. One more risk, and then I'll ask for questions again. Dishonesty. What access do volunteers, or your staff for that matter, have to bank information and other sensitive data that might present an opportunity for embezzling funds? It happens sometimes. It happened not too long ago to a major state association of volunteer managers. And almost always it's a big surprise. The thief is someone who was trusted. We won't go into this area in detail today, but one of my handouts has suggestions on preventing this kind of loss. There's also insurance that's available to protect your organization in that area. Okay, questions on any of those last few things we covered before we get into how to develop a system to prevent all those bad things?
Thanks, William. I do have a question about the handouts. And so I'd like to let everybody know I'll be emailing those after the presentation. But we had a specific question about more info about the driving course. And is that in the handouts, or is there a link or something you could share?
Or if you go to visvolunteers.com and click on member benefits, you'll see more information about that.
And I do believe it is a paid class, but I think it's well worth the investment. It's
free. If you're a member of VIS, it is free to you and all of your volunteer drivers.
Wonderful, thank you. Let's see, so in terms of automobile liability, I don't see any other questions. Paul, oh wait, let me take that back. There's something in, oh, and just feedback from the audience who took the course, and they said they learned a lot. So just a nice little testimonial there. Paula, I'm wondering if you've got any questions for William about automobile liability issues.
I don't have any questions about automobile liability in as much as until I assess it, I'm trying to convince my organization to stop letting volunteers drive vehicles so we can make a concerted plan to manage risk. Um, I do have a suggestion from everyone when it comes to training your volunteers. It's been 2 years now, and I still have volunteers remembering the specific training about managing liability to our collections in the museum. We've got a great training that asks people to think of risks and think of their responses and pick the best option. So, say someone bumps into a porcelain in our museum and something breaks. What do you do? The options of our quiz, we've been doing it 2 years now, are number one, move the damaged object away so visitors can't see something was broken and assume someone else will fix it. Option two, put the pieces in your pocket and take them home because you're sure you can repair it yourself before anybody else has to trouble themselves about it. And option three, cordon off the area that visitors might be stepping on the broken object, injuring themselves, and call collections staff immediately. Of course, my organization would hope that every volunteer would pick option three, but both option one and option two have been picked in the past, prompting this very tongue-in-cheek layout of options for when something happens. And I still have volunteers coming up to me and say, gosh, I still remember that great training about, fire, flood, falls, and damage to the collection. And it was so clever of you to build in some jokes because now we all talk about it. So I encourage you, if you can, to approach this in a serious but slightly lighthearted manner so that it really sticks in people's heads.
Yeah, that's like we said before. They always remember how you made them feel when you told them something. So you've come up with a clever device. How much more time do we have? Because I may skip over a little bit.
Just one.
15 more minutes.
Yeah, 15 more minutes. One more quick question, and this will be a longer answer than you've got time for. But just wondering now, with the advent of ride sharing, Uber or Lyft, and is there something there that we need to be?
That is a huge problem because insurance companies fail to make a distinction between volunteer drivers who may be reimbursed their expenses and Uber and Lyft drivers who are in it for a profit. It's a big problem, and we're doing what we can to address it. If anybody wants to discuss that further, please give me a call and I'll be happy to go over it. But we're trying to do what we can and raise awareness of the fact that insurance companies are being way too cagey about what they would do to respond to a claim.
Wonderful. I do have another question, but I'll wait until the next round. So go ahead.
Okay. All right. We've talked about different risk scenarios and how they can be addressed. Let's put it all together in a system. And again, I may have to rush through this a little bit, but you'll have the PowerPoint presentation, which perhaps will have some of the things I didn't get to talk about specifically. The system should allow you to identify risks that are specific to your operation and manage them in a way that will work today and next month and next year. We've done a little risk identification today as we reviewed various injury and liability scenarios. That's the first step. Next, decide what risk you should worry about the most and which ones you can accept. And then determine how you can reduce or eliminate the most serious ones. Insurance is for the serious risks that you cannot eliminate entirely. Then decide how you will respond if an incident does occur. Make risk management a guiding principle of your selection, orientation, and training. Hold people accountable for following your procedures, and if something bad does happen, learn what you can from it. So after you've thought about the fall hazards and the back injuries and liability scenarios and such that we've identified, dig deeper, get your best people together, think about what could possibly happen. Utilities and mass transit systems have been exploring this question for as long as there's been utilities and mass transit. After Hurricane Sandy in 2012, new chapters were added. In Boston, 7 years ago, the police department and fire department, emergency medical teams and hospitals conducted drills on how to respond if there were multiple bomb attacks in the city. So what happened on the day of the Boston Marathon 7 years ago? Many lives were saved because those people knew exactly what to do when the unthinkable happened. Now, every organization has unthinkables, including yours. So that's why we asked that threshold question, what could possibly go wrong? We talked about screening volunteers and training them to prevent a possible assault on someone in their care. But look at it from the other side too. What if a volunteer were assaulted by a client, or by a client's dog, or a client's nephew? Would those kinds of scenarios be possible in your world? What if a volunteer accidentally clicked on a ransomware link? What would that do to you? Do clients ever ask volunteers to do unexpected tasks at the client's home? Maybe maybe they say, could you move this heavy desk from my attic down to my basement, please? Or could you come back Saturday and help me move 50 bags of mulch? Now, volunteers are geared to help people. That's the way they're wired, right? But you shouldn't allow volunteers to do things like that unless they talk with you first. I'm saying you as the volunteer supervisor, and you and the client talk about it, make sure everyone understands what's being requested. And then you determine that the volunteer is both willing and able to do those extra things. If you can't come to that determination, maybe there's another organization in your community that can. So assess all the risks that you can imagine, both in terms of how often they're likely to happen and how severe they would be if they did happen. And you consider frequency and severity together. But frequency doesn't mean necessarily that it's the biggest risk. If you have people working with hammers and nails, you're going to get a bruised thumb every once in a while, but usually it isn't serious. But if the Second Mile Foundation, for example, you might remember them, although they've been defunct for several years, they had a risk that was very remote. The fact that their founder would be molesting children. It might be so infrequent that you might tend to overlook it, but it's the kind of thing that can and did bring an organization down. So consider all the possibilities. And by the way, there can't be any taboos. If it can't be discussed, it can't be managed. So that's why you dig deep for all the possible risks you can imagine. Then go to the next step. What can you do to eliminate or reduce those risks? I mentioned the scenario of a volunteer who's at a client's home and is asked to perform some unexpected task. Following the chain of command, that volunteer knows to check with the volunteer supervisor before agreeing to do it. And then the volunteer supervisor makes sure what's being requested. Can the volunteer do it? Are they willing to? Then you move ahead. Now that may seem like way too much communication, but it can prevent a situation in which a volunteer gets hurt, or maybe a client alleges that a volunteer stole something from their house, or that maybe if the client has dementia, they also make other allegations against the volunteer, and you didn't even know that the volunteer was in the house. So it's not too much communication. It's really essential risk management. The system that you develop to manage your risk might include training on specific areas where there's an exposure. For example, the IRS rules about political advocacy. You know, if a volunteer speaks for your organization and promotes a particular candidate, you're jeopardizing your tax-exempt status. It could include training in vehicle safety, separation of duties where handling money is involved, being aware of online scams so they don't click on that link for the ransomware, eliminating hazards that could cause a fall, a number of other strategies. Just think about what your volunteers will be doing, think about what could go wrong, and figure out a practical way to prevent those outcomes. You see a reference in the second bullet item there to risk transfer. That means you buy insurance for the serious risks that you cannot eliminate entirely. My organization specializes in insurance that protects volunteers in case they get hurt, or they accidentally hurt someone else, or damage someone's property, or they're at fault in a vehicle accident. One of the handouts for this session is an overview of the kinds of insurance that nonprofit organizations typically need. It's about 3 pages. You might find it useful. All right, let's look briefly at selection, orientation, and training. I remember from your poll question, your answers to the poll questions, that it looks like this group of attendees is doing a great job in that area. Do you have a registration form for volunteers? Make that application form work to your advantage in selecting and assigning them. Use it to describe the available assignments and ask about their areas of interest, special skills, and so forth. Background checks we've talked about. They need to be tailored to the responsibilities of the volunteer. The Fair Credit Reporting Act has certain requirements. There are other legal constraints. That's why it's best left to a professional firm to handle that for you. With orientation, one of the risks with volunteer involvement is not communicating what's expected. Your orientation program is a great opportunity to reduce that risk. When people are left to improvise, the results might not be very good. So take improvisation off the table. Does the volunteer know who to report to? Who do they see if they need something, or they have a complaint or a problem? And again, as I mentioned before, it's a good idea to have veteran volunteers train new ones. Just because volunteers are unpaid, that doesn't mean you can't discipline them or even terminate them if necessary. Sometimes in a close-knit organization, people are reluctant to question or criticize others, but that creates a risk, and it can hurt you. Don't worry about offending the volunteer. As long as you're sincere with them and keep your organization's interest as your first priority, you'll be okay. I know that there are some of you sitting out there who have probably been through this process of having to discipline or even terminate a volunteer and tell them that maybe their light could shine a little brighter somewhere else. If you adopt new performance standards, make sure current volunteers know that it's not a backdoor criticism of them. Just let them know you're adopting some standard procedures as part of your program to manage risk. All right, now to the last item here. If an incident does happen, have formal procedures for response. If a volunteer is injured, injures someone else, or damages someone's property, what are the volunteer's responsibilities? What are those of his or her supervisor to address the issue? Make sure it's written, communicated, and understood. The chain of command is so important. Make sure that volunteers know if there's an incident, they're to report it to their supervisor, not to the police or a government agency. As long as the mandated reporting laws of your jurisdiction allow, make it the supervisor's job to handle it. How do they know what to do? Well, it goes back to brainstorming the risk scenarios and how to deal with each risk you can imagine. That's where you build in your response. In case of an injury, once the injured person gets medical attention, get as much information as you can about what caused the injury. talk to witnesses, write down what they say. If it's a liability, potential liability claim, don't admit liability, just get the facts and tell the other party you will report it to your insurance company. And do that right away, by the way. Your insurance contract says that you are to report claims in a timely way. Don't put yourself in a position of arguing about whether it was timely. So that might mean sometimes that if you have an attorney on your board who says, well, let's see what happens, maybe it'll blow over. No, that could jeopardize your coverage. Report the claim right away. If it turns out to be nothing, then you haven't lost anything. After your initial response, see what you can learn. Deconstruct what happened. Were your safety procedures being followed? If not, why not? And what should have been done differently? Having that information can help with training to prevent a future occurrence. So that is an overview of managing the risks that go with volunteer engagement. Here is a list of the handouts that I've mentioned that you can download. If you decide to develop a formal risk management system or refine the one that you have, you might want to make it official by adopting a risk management policy statement. There's a sample in the handouts. Communicate that throughout the organization. Play it up in your Form 990 and other documents that your supporters might see. So, what questions might there be at this point? Because I'm through.
Great. I've got 3 quick ones, and then just want to encourage everybody to stay tuned till the very end because Paula has some great announcements. First one, is it possible, and if so, how do you ensure volunteers participate in safety trainings when you have a large volunteer corps and you need them all?
How do you ensure, like make sure, or ensure like have a policy? I'm not sure which one that means.
Sure.
I'm sorry?
How do you make sure?
How do you make sure that they all participate? Is that the question?
Yes.
And is this like a one-time event where you have volunteers who are just showing up and they've never worked with your association or your organization before?
I'm not sure, but it may go with a follow-up question about any difference between application and training for special event one-off volunteers and volunteers who will be with you for a long time.
Yeah, the only difference would be the continuity for your volunteers who are with you for a long time. As I mentioned, touch on safety training frequently. But for those who just show up, they need to show up early enough that they're not just going to run straight to their station. They need to show up early enough that they will be given safety training for that event. Here's what you're going to be asked to do. Here's the safety equipment that you're supposed to use. Be sure not to trip over these ropes that are holding the tents down. Whatever it might be in that particular environment, don't get out in the middle of the street to direct traffic. We have other people to do that. Whatever risk scenarios you've brainstormed for that event, make sure that the volunteers show up an hour early or whatever it takes to go over that. And if they just show up and miss the training, they don't get to volunteer.
Okay. And then the next question, which is our last question, should documentation or conversation about whether a volunteer is comfortable lifting something 75 pounds, something heavy, be in writing, or can it be managed by oral conversation?
I think it can be managed with oral conversation. And this is where your veteran volunteer can make a judgment. If it's a borderline call and they think that that volunteer might be injured lifting that 75 pounds, give them something else to do. That's back to the definition of negligence. You did something you should have known not to do. That attorney is going to say, well, you should have known that they couldn't lift 75 pounds. So if it's anywhere near a borderline call, err on the side of caution.
Thank you very much. That is all I have for questions. And we'll let Paula go ahead and switch back her slide and follow up with our announcements.
Yeah, that's just my, if you see that slide, the last slide there, it just has my contact information. Please give me a call if you have questions, as long as it's not 3 o'clock in the morning. If you think of something that you forgot to ask during this session, please reach out and I'll be happy to answer it as best I can.
All right, William, if you'll stop sharing, I'll share my screen with everybody and we'll wrap this webinar up.
All right.
That was our question piece. Okay. Thank you, William. We so appreciate your time today and this amazing wisdom you've shared, assessing and managing our risk, and then all these documents. I think it'll keep everybody on track to really implement what you're talking about, take this back to our organizations, and make some direct changes, which is I always love to see that out of Academy presentations.
All right. Well, let me just say I admire what everybody in this webinar does and what your volunteers do. And I wish everybody a most successful 2020.
Thank you. Now
so
for
I'm
a couple,
go ahead. I'm going to leave you now, but everybody have a great weekend.
Perfect. Thanks so much, William.
Uh-huh.
Couple of quick announcements for everyone. There's a new Alive member newsletter coming out soon. So if you're curious about any of these following updates that I'm going to go over super quick, check the newsletter or log into the website, www.volunteeralive.org. Save the date for the next Academy webinars, February 21st. Emily Bromet-Bauer and Kelly Crawford will be presenting Advocacy and Volunteer Engagement, Who, What, Why, and How. And then on March 18th, Barry Altland will be joining us to present The Accidental Trainer, Developing Immersive Learning as Part of Your Volunteer Engagement Strategy. I'm quite excited for both of these upcoming webinars, and I hope that some of you will be inspired to present or co-present on a topic. Alive is always seeking webinar topics that you are interested in, and we are committed to giving you all opportunities to develop your professional skills by presenting a webinar. Alive also has committee positions open in membership, marketing, and programs and advocacy. You can see the newsletter for more details, or feel free to message either myself or Gretchen. Getting involved in a committee is a wonderful way to build your own network while contributing to the national conversation about volunteer engagement. We hope you're all having a happy new year and you'll continue with us in 2020. We want to thank Sterling Volunteers for their sponsorship of this year and our webinar series to expand our options for you in training for our members and colleagues in the field. This is my contact information and Gretchen's contact information. We're always here for you. We'd love to hear from you, and we hope you'll join us for the next Academy webinar on February 21st.
Thank you, everybody. I'll go ahead and end the webinar now. Watch for a follow-up email with those handouts. If you don't receive them, check your spam folder or email me individually. And tomorrow you'll be getting a just quick survey. We'd love to have your input and comments, and we'll see you next month. Happy Friday, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you, Gretchen.